UNESCO has a new report out on how education can lead to climate action. We can now bring in Manos Antoninis, Director of Global Education Monitoring at UNESCO. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24 today. What are some of the main findings from this report?
Well, it's the big conundrum. How can education contribute to addressing the challenge of climate change? Unfortunately, the problem with education is the more education we have, people raise their incomes and therefore they consume more and ultimately they contribute more to the climate change problem that we're facing today. So we are really desperately trying to find answers to the common sense question. Of course, we cannot address climate change without education. We need more people who are carrying the skills that they need to adapt to climate change, but also to mitigate, to help us with the green transition. But when we look at education in more detail, we find that being more educated does not lead you to be more prone to take the actions that we need in our daily lives. And that means we really need to think very, very carefully about our model of education.
I want to talk about education in a second, but just from what you just said there, when people raise their incomes, they consume more. But aren't they also more aware?
There is some small relationship between more education and more awareness, but awareness is not enough. In fact, some very interesting statistics show that people are generally aware about the future threat to our lives from climate change. And it's true that more educated people show that awareness more strongly, but they all don't seem to have any differences between them according to their level of education as to whether they think climate change may affect their lives, their own lives, not the lives of their children or grandchildren. And that suggests that there is really a problem because knowledge is not enough. And we need other aspects for our education to help us prompt to the right action. So feelings, emotions, solidarity, understanding of the consequences of our actions for the lives of others.
So what should be done to improve education systems? What, for example, should be taught that isn't being taught?
Well, first of all, countries still think that the main tool that people should have is knowledge, scientific knowledge. And unfortunately, that's not enough. And yet, reviews of what countries submit to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change suggest that most countries emphasize knowledge, cognitive knowledge. They emphasize at a much lesser degree behavioral understanding and social and emotional learning. So that is a key alarm, really. It is, in many ways, it's the most important education challenge we have. Currently, there are a lot of global initiatives to address climate change. And yet, out of about 70 that we have counted, only 2 include education. That's because some of the major funders do not seem to have faith that education can play a role. And yet we know that it's not possible. Education has to be a key tool for fighting climate change, because if people do not change the way they think and behave, how can we address this challenge?
Are we seeing a discrepancy in the global south than in the north, for instance? Because it seems that the global south is bearing the brunt and feeling the effects of climate change quite like now.
Well, it's true that education does still have a recognizable positive impact. More educated farmers in contexts like the one you just showed from Southern Africa are better able to adjust their farming techniques, their cropping patterns, the way they combine inputs. They can adjust and therefore they can help their families and themselves. So education still has that role. We cannot ignore it. But I think it's the need to go beyond that. It's about how our education systems and the content of it, and we have introduced a new indicator in partnership with UNESCO and with colleagues in Canada who have analyzed curriculum documents from all over the world. And they show that, first of all, we make the mistake of bringing more content in scientific subjects, and yet we need to spread that knowledge in science and in social science. And countries also make the mistake of emphasizing such knowledge at lower and upper secondary, but we need to start very early because it's really at the younger ages where we need to invest. And still, even though we talk about environment in general, in a lot of our curriculum documents, concepts related to climate change and to biodiversity, which really go to the core of what we need to be aware, are still largely absent. And mainly global north countries have made some progress, but all countries need to contribute to this effort.
Manos, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. That was UNESCO's Manos Antoninis there.